Schon gedrückt?
Hast schon gedrückt, ja? Genau, läuft. Okay.
Ich habe gar nicht gefragt. Englisch, ja?
Englisch, ja?
Ja, ja, ist so.
Fragen, aber
No. Good. So, welcome everyone. This was a challenging presentation to prepare. We did a lot of stuff with media recently, and Matthias challenged me to create overview over all the solutions that we created, and we've been involved in maintaining the media initiative for a long time. So this here is the presentation is shifting towards the direction of all the connected solutions that we created. But first of all, we should create a little bit of overview. I'm Miro, currently focused on maintaining paragraphs. My team led the media initiative for a while, and we maintained like 70 modules. Let's focus on media and related topics here. So first, when we talk about connected media, the discussion starts somewhere like, okay, now we're talking about managing media. Now what is media? We need to talk about how do we understand content. We pick certain examples. Like we want to show the different media approaches by looking at certain service providers or solutions. By example, I'm talking through all the different types of media that we identified, modules that support them, and later on, like how digital asset management systems like cover a certain amount of these type of media, like maybe remotely, and how these processes work. So quickly looking at Drupal 8, the crazy landscape shifted in a very short time from a trivial understanding of managed file, over file entity that wrapped it into a file entity, which was a minimum solution because the real media project was not ready in the early days. So we started with file entity, it's kind of abandoned, then we maintained the media entity module in contrib, and now it shifted into core. And still this transition, even if we have now a library in core, which is available, it's a very limited situation, like what the library currently does with the browser, and there is still stuff in contrib and in transition. So you can, we have the media entity module is replaced with the core media module, but everything that integrated before with the media module needs to do the switch, and not everything is yet at the point where this transition happened. And if the library improves over time, it will even replace more solutions that are currently stable and things that are currently working. As a reference, this was Dries' assessment in 2016, so my talk is actually about the most important priorities of content authors, from looking at the needs of a richer image, media integration, and digital asset management. So we're hitting the point of maximum interest and pain points of authors. And if you look at any kind of example, sure, you see media items everywhere, yet we need to talk about what exactly is media. Maybe for sure you identify the images, but sometimes it's also text, metadata information with it, to understand how we can manage these elements, maybe across multiple systems. So we've done this by maintaining modules, base modules, building distributions, working with Thunder, building custom distributions, and the whole, tons of projects. And that helped us to figure out what are the best practices from all these projects, and maybe to create this overview for you, what types of approaches and solutions are hidden in all these different systems. So if we look at 8.6, we have the media which is stable. We have the library which is experimental currently. And it's a very minimal solution, which is like really limited and not extensible. It still supports a variety of sources, what core provides, but for everything else we need a lot of contrib. And this is how it looks like. So you cannot really change how this library works. I guess everyone who is following the recent core updates has seen this already. So to understand the architecture and the consequences of decoupling, basically the framework that we have is like we have an entity now, not necessarily a file. The entity can have a reference to a local file, but the entity could use anything like an entity reference to link to other media or other things, or it can be a remote identifier that's simply an ID of a third-party system that represents media. Can be an URL, a link, which is maybe referencing a tweet. So you're managing a tweet in your media repository as something that can be used across your site, and you know where like this tweet has been placed inside. But when looking at this, like we can manage media locally inside Drupal. With local media management, I mean like you're uploading files and they exist only inside your Drupal and you own the full control with such a simple solution. As soon as we introduce a third-party service provider and we connect it, somehow, hopefully, we can benefit from that third-party system because it has very specific functionality, say Twitter presenting a tweet and you enter into their platform. But it also means that, like, let's say, no, at first, these solutions, hopefully they are much more finished out of the box, so they kind of provide all this value immediately, right after connecting. But it means like they're remotely managed, so you manage them on this system, and somehow there's a reference. So there is a dependency. But in true reality, as soon as you connect these systems, you have a certain amount of information, like metadata, that is copied over into Drupal to display, or to maybe do a certain amount of management inside Drupal. And from that point, you have a mixed reality, where you need to deal with the situation like there's an update on the other side, and the things can basically divert. We will see that. To explain also the most important perspective of media management, there's the whole life cycle of a media item, from starting where you have something, you want to upload it, someone needs to deal about the processing of it, it's stored somewhere, someone is placing it inside a piece of content, and then it's displayed in this context. And then, because it's displayed, like formatted in this context, we need to figure out how to deliver the assets to the end client. And this whole life cycle, originally inside Drupal, needs to be like supported to certain depth with the third-party service provider that integrates with it. In any case, adding a provider adds complexity, dependency, maybe intentionally a lock-in, because you never can move away again, and it adds a certain pain in case they change their APIs. Don't underestimate that. Isolated solutions can be tested. You can release them whenever you want. As soon as you have a third-party service provider, they might force you to update the integration at a certain point in time. So in any case, it's a lot of extra complexity. And most importantly, beside all the extra value the service provider provides you by using that external system, you need to deal with the expectations of the user of the Drupal system. And in order to do this, basically you need very deep integration between Drupal and the third-party system, because I will show you how crazy all these expectations are. Or, yes, and if you don't, the users experience limitations and frustration. And this is a list of the expectations say you have these expectations maybe as a site builder because you use the tools inside Drupal to build your site, and you don't want to work different just because you're using a third-party system. So first, sure, it needs to be just available, just there, no downtime, and that's already sometimes the point. If they put their system into maintenance or so, you experience already unwanted effects. It's already an issue maybe if you have a closed development environment and things like this. It's the first problem. Through decoupling, you experience slower access to assets. Maybe everything before showing something needs to be done through an API call, so we need to deal with speed issues. What is obvious inside Drupal, every user has an account. Like you're logging in, you can have personalized access, maybe limited actions and stuff like this is limited if the third-party provider uses one single key for the whole instance and basically does not know what user is interacting with these things. We have entity types and the whole field system and how we configure this. It sometimes say in the media system, we're using these bundles and sources, and suddenly you have one provider maybe offering 5 different types of media. How are we mapping this to the way how we think and work with bundles in Drupal? Multilingual, for sure, a big issue, because the other system does not know maybe how many languages that we display, and it's a different system that manages this metadata. Yeah, once you're at revisions, that's really great. It's already, if you start implementing custom browser, you want to have views, add custom filters quickly, you're used to this stuff. If you place something, you want to know about usage. I will show quickly afterward what nice solutions are there. So the other system should know about usage, where is which asset placed. You know how the formatters work. These days, everyone is just expecting responsive image styles. But that's very complex to implement with a third-party service provider because you're not usually going through the regular image style, image derivatives, and all this stack. You're kind of setting up something in parallel, and it's hard to configure this with the regular UI. Of course, form modes when editing, maybe dealing with metadata updates if you're doing it exactly inside Drupal itself, and all the crazy things, including like maybe content moderation, where all this stuff is in context of workflows. So hopefully you will remember these things when I point you to these challenges with the specific solutions. So this was actually this doesn't exist yet, but we thought like, hey, we're saving all our assets, our storage to our own cloud, Nextcloud instance. Wouldn't it be a great idea to not manage images and all this stuff inside Drupal, just to connect it with our Office instance and basically say, we want to browse this thing natively. It feels like the perfect approach. Why should we want to take these things manually into our Drupal site? And basically, the immediate thing that you're thinking about is like, yes, the system, it will be less site building, less, the system already has capability to manage these files and stuff. I don't need to think about what metadata would I want to add, like links to origins, maybe license metadata. For sure, it provides a browser. You can see the browser already in own cloud. We could reuse that. We don't need to think about how our browser should look like, how we can improve it. Systems usually already display metadata, so we could like extract this stuff. It displays a thumbnail in the browser. It has predefined metadata structure. But the real, like when you really want to do it and then work with that, you immediately hit the problem. You already have user accounts on your own cloud. You have different user accounts on the Drupal side. You need to figure out how to bring these together. If you start to think per user, initially that works, but as soon as someone has picked an asset, another user will look at the same content where this asset is used. So you start to have, maybe someone can see an asset the other user did not see before. So you really need to figure out, like, what does limited access mean before and maybe after? So you're kind of changing how access works by using media. OwnCloud, for instance, does not provide any answer how we want to deal with the image, like derivatives or something like cropping. And even usage report, I've never seen something like, okay, I can see there, like, where did we actually use this file? And dealing with updates or metadata updates. In the end, if you look at this, basically what we would do by connecting these two systems is the very same thing, like you don't get any added value except yet that you don't need to download or upload or drag and drop the file, but there is no added value inside the Drupal domain by connecting such a solution. And it's like Drupal itself. If these systems would have been initially thought for integration with a third-party system, like API first, then the situation would be much different. In the most cases, these systems are actually designed as standalone solutions, and at some point, we have use cases, and they figure out, oh, we need to provide an API for this, and the APIs are initially very limited. Quickly, a few concepts across this life cycle that we experience that add value for you if you manage media, that are maybe not known to everyone. Just to think about use cases to figure out also what it means later for the dams. So if we have metadata replication, data that is like from the third-party system copied over into Drupal, usually it's field-based, like you define, okay, this field is connected and mapped to this field in the other system, like put the tags from there into this field, and typically once, like in the first situation where you use the asset, it's saved. And from here on, we need to figure out whether we do updates at all. And in the most cases, integrations decide not to update ever and say, like, okay, we have it connected, but we want to allow the user in Drupal maybe to change the caption. And that's a decision inside Drupal. And we cannot really feed it back because we have no management process to review these changes in the digital asset management system. So that's the trivial minimum approach. And there are some where we do updates, but it's really hard to figure out, did someone change it inside Drupal? Can we still override it? Or are we like, how to deal with potential changes? Can we really override it how it was? And when we look at the placement, we have three types of placement. We have like the standard visual thing. You have a WYSIWYG, maybe entity embed something where you place a media item in it, or you have a field living on an element, on maybe a piece of content itself, or it can be an entity on itself, like a paragraph typically can be like an image paragraph or something, so it's a full entity on itself representing media that is placed. And when we talk about like consistency, just a very important module that helps us to deal with it. Elements can sometimes change the names. I know it's usually not happening with media elements that you place, but when we look at Linkit, if you place, say, a link to just a download file, say you put a PDF link inside WYSIWYG, you can use Linkit to make it a managed link. So Linkit can deal with, let's say, maybe the most simple one. It offers a matcher. So first of all, it can help you explore what is available by like looking into what media things are there, and it then, when you pick the media item and you place it inside the WYSIWYG thing, basically you have this managed placement, and from there on you don't risk that the links or the thing is broken. And most importantly, also Linkit has integration with usage. I'll show this later. So it means we have managed understanding that the entity is placed there, so we can track that information and deal with it somehow. And there's a patch for field support to also use Linkit as a matcher and browser on link fields. Yes, entity usage is a very helpful tool that can, meanwhile, it's pluggable. You can use entity references, like when you place an entity like media, it can provide you a tab where you basically say this media is used on this node with this reference on this paragraph, maybe inside a link field that is linked to this media item, or with entity embed in WYSIWYG. I can show you this. The most recent version has additional counts and stuff like this, and multilingual support and revision support, which is pretty challenging. Like, media can also be used in previous revisions, so that's reason to keep it. Otherwise, it's like you cannot revert back. There's the concept of selection. As said, Drupal 8.6 has a very limited hard-coded browser. If we want to be really full-featured and have nice experience, we're using Entity Browser, and that's also the starting point for third-party service integrations. Everything we've built is like Entity Browser plugin alike, because it's a very beautiful abstraction, and it helps us to allow, with configurability, to define like which browser do we want to show to the user, highly extensible and configurable, and pretty like used in multiple installations. You can see this here, that we can add these tabs as we want. Can be like a browser, it can be an upload element, it can, these are typically also views that you can configure as you need them. And for sure the usual filters, like we see here, it allows us more flexibility to decide about custom filters that fit your use case. Once we talk about upload, users usually expect or wish that they can deal with multiple images uploaded at once or multiple assets uploaded at once. Dropzone.js has a beautiful integration that supports multiple uploads inside the entity browser that you see here. And yes, we have then at the end, for instance, the concept of expiration, that media basically at some point is no more relevant, which can be quite challenging if you put this type of content into, say, grids. So it can lead to layout changes if suddenly an element disappears. But there is a module where you can configure like when a media element is expired and cannot be used anymore as unpublished. Very quick walk now as a next thing to all the different types of media that we're experiencing in the system. There's a picture. It's the most common use case if you think about media. And we have actually what most people think about when we talk about media is the whole stack built around pictures, like image styles, derivatives. But all these things are very specific to pictures because you cannot apply to videos or all other types of media. There is inside it, there's for sure for large payloads, we would want to have lazy loading. You have image toolkit pluggability where GD and ImageMagick is available. ImageMagick helps a lot where you can basically deal with bigger images and certain resource limitations. So look at it if you experience problems with huge images. And there are also effect plugins where you, for instance, can apply, say, watermarks through or deal with cropping. I will show this later. So there's crop API, quite popular. There is one thing with focal point. There is one thing where you basically, with the image widget crop, you choose the exact cropping area per image style, per crop style. And there is automated crop, that's very early stage, but the idea that basically the system can automatically crop what you upload. There is Blazy that is really popular to solve this lazy loading problem, to like speed up the initial load of the page and only load stuff that is inside the viewport. There are more modules. I just put these because they exist and are kind of used. But I mean, I definitely, we're always using Blazy and we're very happy with it. And now this is actually the primary use case where we introduced the digital asset management systems, and most of them really focus on these images only. And yeah, let's check this a little bit later. There's SVG. It's a very interesting asset. When you use it, maybe you even want to inline it. Maybe it needs a bit of template or code, but it allows you to take over control of how SVGs are displayed. You can even work with conditional visibility in CSS if you use inline. If you output it inline, it's really an interesting approach for site building or for theming. What we discovered at some point is the font awesome. We basically added, like we're adding typically a media type that is just a field of font awesome. There's a browser where you really can browse in the font awesome, the whole list of characters, icons that are available, and afterwards you have a managed icon, and you can like decide, you can manage the way how you're working with symbols. So you know this symbol is used in these and these contexts, and so you have a guarantee that you're like have a unified language, a visual language when you work with these type of icons. And there's just this tiny hint. You also want to use icons into the menu and the menu system, for instance, or other areas that are not regular content. And for these, it's always a very special solution. Like you cannot place media items in the menu or something like this. So it's always very challenging when you think of this generalized media approach, and then you want to place it at locations that don't fit our understanding of the content area. There's video, there's a lot in core now. We have even a remote video thingy that's based on OEmbed. You do not see that it's OEmbed based, it's a base class. And actually you cannot benefit of the fact that it's OEmbed based, so you cannot take other OEmbed based service providers except video. Still, lots of people are working with just players. These days not necessarily required because we have the HTML5 video tag, but you can have a player that is replacing how this is output, and maybe it supports better your need of theming or additional functionality of how the videos like provide interaction. There is the video embed thing, so you can place videos inside WYSIWYG. And there are service providers that completely focus on delivering a video resource. I just put Brightcove as an example. And to put ones, it's a bit frustrating. Most of the solutions I'm talking about have a very low usage in Drupal 8. And it's a bit challenging to figure out like what's the relevancy of these things, because usually the Drupal.org lists relevancy by total usage, and the Drupal 7 usage is about 10 to 20 or even more times bigger than the Drupal 8 usage, and Drupal 8 modules do not even show up on the list if you look at the global usage list of Drupal.org modules. So you still see basically the lists dominated by Drupal 7. If you go to the modules overview list, so not the usage list on Drupal.org, just the modules overview, And if you filter there by Drupal 8, it's actually listed by the relevancy of Drupal 8 only, which helps a bit, but it's really challenging sometimes to understand, like, what's the relevancy of 240 usage of such a module. But most of the modules I presented to you are in these numbers, or maybe a few thousands, and that they're still interesting to look at. We have audio. Yes, Drupal 8.6 supports the local audio files. There are also service providers that completely focus on audio delivery. For sure, there are more. And here we are at the point where I want to quickly explain you one of the biggest challenges at the current stage. If we want to build a gallery, we have like 5 different ways to decide how are we going to build your gallery. It can be as simple as, if you have a piece of content, you can basically place one field and make it multi-value. It can be a reference to multiple media, or it can be even, say, a file field with multiple values, and that's going to be formatted as a multiple element something, which is an unreusable gallery. And then you say, well, we have media, we can put the gallery into media, we create a source, like a source, like a bundle of a media type that is a gallery. Through this, we're doing the same. We put their entity references to multiple media items, and then you can create your reusable gallery in the media system. Now, the current situation is, now you can create a mixed gallery even. Like, you can even create a tweet, an image, a video, and put all these into the same gallery, and you need to deal with this problem, or you need to define a gallery that is limited to certain content types. You can basically, even because the media element is not living on its own, like it's stored on its own, but it typically is not displayed as a standalone thing. Sometimes media companies decide that the content type is like we need a gallery content type that is standalone, has its own node, and when you start to add paragraphs, it's even worse. You can do the same there as well. Do your own math decisions, but it's challenging to do this right for your specific use case. Slick, most popularly, there are also other things like Flex Slider that support the gallery use case for rendering, and I'm quickly going through the different other types of media just as an example, so that we have overview. We can make a Twitter bundle, we can make an Instagram bundle, we could even like save a map inside media, so we have a map that can be placed at some locations. We can now we start to go into the direction of interaction. We have polls in core. Sure, usually you will not put the poll as a field inside the media element, but we can think like media, when you involve a third-party service provider, can be interactive, like a poll. For instance, like this Riddle marketplace that is used within Thunder. And we can go into the direction where, for instance, H5P, it's a very interesting third-party provider that gives you editors to create experiences like this type of quizzes, questions, to create interaction on the page. And it's typically people are using, for instance, paragraphs and create a H5P paragraph, so you can place these things on your site. And even more generic, OEmbed is a framework that can, like, everything that has an element that can be displayed somewhere else, you can use OEmbed to describe it and offer a widget. There are like hundreds, even service providers that support OEmbed. With such an OEmbed module, you can basically just say, for instance, take the video from there, take this thing from there by just passing in an URL. So it's an URL that is converted to whatever the widget looks like. And it maybe makes sense to create an OEmbed media bundle for you. And the last thing, the maybe most crazy thing, but we are using this heavily, you can actually just make a code text field that is output without any filtering, and through this you can basically connect to any third-party thing that has no API, no integration, that is just offering the snippet. And you have now, if you put it like this into Drupal, you then have an understanding of where are we using this type of asset, be it a form or something. And it's not just copy-pasted script snippets that are hidden inside some text somewhere. If you combine it with the usage, it's a really helpful approach to do this, to put these things into the media library in case there's multiple use. We have, if we look at the stack, how Drupal works with delivery, like on the front end and on the back end, if you take Fly system allows, like everything inside Drupal works the very same way and allows you to basically, Drupal feels like it's saving a local path, but it uses stream wrappers that can redirect it and store it on, say, an S3 asset. And for Drupal, for everything it looks like this is locally existing. So it adds a little bit of delay, but it's very helpful to, say, in case you have very expensive storage and you want to offload this type of media. Sometimes you can offload hundreds of gigabytes to a very cheap third-party system. And so, yes, there are multiple alternatives and besides Fly systems that do the same. And when combined with a module like CDN, you can then basically say, and like the images, the assets that we're delivering, maybe static assets, are redirected to a separate domain. And this domain, say static.yourdomain.com, this domain points to the CDN system. And the CDN then basically, in case the asset is already there, it directly delivers it. In case it's not there, it fetches it from your site with the very same URL from your primary domain, caches it, and delivers it there. That's very helpful to offload a certain amount of traffic or of these type of resources. And you can do the same with Cloudflare, for instance, on the DNS level, where it adds an interception before the requests hit your own website. It can even optimize images, and through this, they do not charge for traffic. We have cases where we are reduced 80% of the traffic costs, sometimes even thousands per month, that would cost on the primary hosting server, and they just deliver it for free with the free account. Let's quickly go through then the two primary use cases of DAMs that we've built. For Elvis, it's a very basic integration. It's by Woodwing. When you use media, it stores the media locally. So in the situation where you basically pick an item, it saves down what is there, and from then on, Drupal works like it's not existing. And we're just using the Elvis DAM when we're browsing. It has native support for keyword, like full text search or a folder concept, and it's pretty much hard-coded that these two things work, and that's a direct API integration, so there's nothing like views that you can use. But if you pick an asset, basically it's really then saved as a Elvis image, and then we can deliver it and use all the internal Drupal tools. We see this is an example of fields, and afterwards you see the configuration here, how we are mapping description to description, so that the things that are present in Elvis are really also saved within Drupal. And after picking an item, you see here that the tags are set. I really only picked the example item in the browser, saved, and then the tags and the description and all this was present, but we're not updating ever. And when we look at Binder, this is really much, much deeper integrated. We have per-user authentication. They have facets that can be specific to a user. Access is restricted. They deal with licensing information and restrictions, you cannot use this because it can only be used in print. And or maybe, for a system that is maybe connected to hundreds of websites with different contexts. It supports multiple asset types. Elvis is limited to image. Here we have video and documents. Supports derivative mapping. We did a huge amount of work to speed up, to avoid API calls. We have batch, like if you upload it, we have batch processing to deal with maybe size limitations. And we have updates behind the scenes, like where metadata is updated again. We have a demo module, and they choose for Lightning as a reference due to the partnership with Akia. I can show you here the mapping, the modules, the derivatives are mapped to, they name it derivatives, which is our image styles, then how these two domains are mapped. We have information again here, that's field names, how we are mapping restriction information on their side to the Drupal side. We have a browser. Here, these option 1, 3, 4 are facets that they can define on their side and that are then dynamically available in Drupal based on the user. The user actually needs to authenticate the first time he uses it with his single sign-on. On the binder side, once you allowed it, it's a transparent process. It's just reload, redirect, and then you see the browser. And they have support for the regular upload, which then triggers a batch process. Also very important due to this usage information thing for them was we want to, when we review a node, we want to see what assets are used. So we have added a tab that is specific for them, where they can review the information, say, of licensing to check before signing off content whether the license information is correct, whether they are not using accidentally something that is not allowed, or even an indication if you mouse over with display, you see the information about the licensing and the icon that it's delivered. It's just some very bad quality things, but you see here the items in action, and you see just now, currently it's inside Drupal, and now we're triggering the batch process that puts it into the binder side and waiting until it's processed on their side and the derivatives are available. So the preview and also the rendering here is actually delivered on their side. So these images are never delivered through Drupal. So they're even the CDN for assets. So we're all the things available in Drupal, the native things like image stack or you cannot configure cropping or something like this in Drupal. The third-party system takes ownership over this, and they have cropping in this case. And yeah, that's the same thing. I think it's doing one thing more, paging. The obvious, we think, but it's not with this kind of integration. And yes, we're demonstrating here search that is actually going through the API and the selection at the end. Just to close here, basically the whole discussion about decoupling and other systems, content pool and all these things are kind of making even content, something like media. There are upcoming presentations, one already took place this morning. But at some point when we talk about sharing content between multiple instances, it's actually content is like a piece of media, like we manage media, and there are suddenly analogies in how we deal with this stuff. That's it. Questions? Sorry. Yes, please. No questions?
Did you download, upload your presentation to the Drupal Europe
Not
site?
yet.
Because,
I will do it.
There are a lot of very convenient links.
Yes.
Could you
Sure.
do that? There is an ability to do that.
Right now.
Yes, it will help. overview of it. Because I knew from your presentation a lot of very useful models that I didn't know yet.
Good. Thank you. Yes?
I actually also want to make an addition. Like, thanks for this like great overview. Like, I think I've seen like most of them, but it's like really good just like to get a good overview. And there's so much you can do there and like configure. And I just wanted to add that maybe like for the media entity usage, there's also like another module called entity reference integrity that like will then also prevent that someone like accidentally deletes like a media that like is being used elsewhere. So they play well together.
More? Good then, thanks a lot and enjoy the DrupalCon or the Drupal Europe event. Thank you.